War is so often a game of dollars and cents. The country with the largest military budget has a distinct advantage. However, a creative country can stretch every single dollar it has to the absolute maximum by finding ways to spend very little on weapons that make mincemeat of the opposition. Ukraine is the world's best example of this philosophy, and it's just done it again. Ukraine's wooden drones are crippling Russia's war machine for pennies, as a recently defeated and humiliated elite airborne force just found out. On August 13th, former Forbes military contributor David Axe revealed in a piece for Euromaidan Press that Ukraine's army and air force had teamed up for a devastating assault 2 days prior. Focusing on a concentration of Russian troops in Bakhmut, which is one of the most important fortress cities in the war, Ukraine launched a combination aerial strike that destroyed Russia's forces. Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade, which took part in the strike, said that it hit Russia's 98th Airborne Division near Bakhmut and around 9.3 miles away from the front line in Donetsk. That's an interesting little fact, as Russia continues to push in Donetsk, with Politico reporting that Ukraine's defense line was punctured by these assaults on August 12th. Ukraine is responding by launching attacks into Russia's rear. There's a certain logic here. Striking Russia behind the front lines can deliver several benefits, ranging from destroying logistical arteries supplying troops on the front to taking out the backup soldiers intended to reinforce those advancing forces when they're depleted. Specifically, the 98th Airborne Division was home to paratroopers that Ukraine says have been fighting in the contested settlement of Chasiv Yar. Slowly but surely, the Russians have been pushing Ukraine's forces out of that small city. But that push may have been destroyed with the loss of so many experienced paratroopers. We mentioned that Ukraine pulled all this off with a clever combination strike. First up was a raid by one of Ukraine's Soviet-era Su-27 fighter jets. For so long relegated to the role of bystander in the war, those twin-engine supersonic jets have become far more useful as Ukraine has gotten its hands on French-made Assam Hammer gliding bombs and US-made Joint Direct Attack Munitions or JDAMs. In both cases, these weapons allow Ukraine to affix wing kits to its huge stockpile of dumb bombs. Those bombs then become precision weapons, capable of gliding toward their targets with the help of the wing kit's navigational systems. Ukraine doesn't have to send its Su-27s directly over Russia's forces to drop bombs. It can launch them from behind the front lines, keeping the jets safe while achieving maximum damage. That's what appears to have happened on August 11th, Axe writes, as Ukraine deployed an Su-27 with Western glide bombs to devastate the 98th Airborne Division's paratroopers. However, that fighter jet and its bombs alone wouldn't have been enough to do the job. Ukraine needed to locate its target first, and after the strike also needed to confirm the damage caused. Enter the Privet 299. The second aspect of the combination strike, Ukraine's Privet drones, offers a rare example of Ukraine being inspired by Russian innovation. Axe writes that the drones are likely similar to Russia's Privet 82 drones, which are fixed-wing, unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, that differ from many counterparts in one important aspect. They're made using wood. While obviously not the sturdiest of materials, wood is at least strong enough for drones to carry out one-way flights. Forbes' David Hambling reported in a June 2023 piece covering Russia's wooden drones. Russia took advantage of that by using its wooden drones for kamikaze raids, costing pennies on the dollar compared to regular drones and more advanced weapons. The Privet 82s have ended up being useful tools in Russia's arsenal. Ukraine appears to have taken that concept and tweaked it. It seems that Ukraine's Privet 299 is capable of carrying explosives, so it can serve as a kamikaze drone. However, we also know that August 11th saw Ukraine use its new drone to conduct surveillance on the 98th Airborne Division's position near Bakhmut. Before the Su-27 struck with its glide bombs, it was Ukraine's new Privet drones providing coordinates and details about the best places to strike. Afterwards, those same drones were sent back in to survey the scene and confirm that Ukraine had scored a direct hit. That's where the tweaks come into play. Ukraine appears to be using its new wooden drones for surveillance purposes while keeping quiet about its potential secondary use as a kamikaze drone. But more important are the words "sent back in." Those three words tell us that Ukraine's new wooden drones appear to be reusable rather than one-way attacking drones that are never intended to return to base. If Russia's Privet 82 innovation saw it create a low-cost wooden drone, Ukraine's evolution of that concept delivers even bigger savings because of its reusability. But it wasn't just surveying the scene that Ukraine's new Privet got up to. Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade provided a few more details in an August 11th X post announcing the strike. Bakhmut, strike on a temporary deployment site of enemy personnel, the statement read. In the video, you can see the work of the new Ukrainian fixed-wing drone Privet 299. That video lasts for 24 seconds and appears to be shot by a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, perhaps even one of its new Privet 299s. However, the drone doing the recording doesn't really matter. What does matter is the footage that it shot. For a few seconds, the video lingers over a building that is reportedly in Bakhmut. Then there's an explosion. one that doesn't seem quite large enough to have been caused by an Assam hammer or JDAM bomb. This was a drone strike. And if the 24th Mechanized Brigade is to be believed, the footage shows a wooden Privet 299 delivering a powerful explosive right to the 98th Airborne Division's doorstep. Watching, waiting, striking. It appears Ukraine's new drone is capable of doing it all. But what did Ukraine really achieve with its August 11th Bakhmut strike? Taking out at least part of Russia's 98th Airborne Division, for one thing. That division has been a handy weapon that Russian President Vladimir Putin has used against Ukraine for over a decade. We know for a fact that members of this division were present in Ukraine's Donbass region during Russia's initial campaign of aggression back in 2014. On August 26, 2014, the BBC reported that 10 members of this division had been caught crossing the border between Ukraine and Russia. The Kremlin tried to claim it was all an accident. Russia hadn't been supporting the separatists in the Donbass, it argued. So the 10 soldiers must have gotten lost during a routine patrol that somehow ended up in Ukraine. Nobody bought that story, especially not Ukraine. The country's military spokesperson at the time, Andriy Lysenko, said, "This wasn't a mistake, but a special mission they were carrying out." These early incursions were clearly a sign of things to come. The 98th Airborne Division has been one of Russia's most potent weapons since it launched its full invasion. Parts of the division's 217th Airborne Regiment were among the first to deploy to Belarus in the build-up to Russia's February invasion, arriving in the Russian allies' territory a month before the supposed special military operation was launched. The 98th Airborne Division was part of the initial Kyiv offensive when Russia's troops rolled in, and it's since been involved in several operations in and around Donetsk, Bakhmut, and Ivanivska. Since April 2024, the 98th Airborne Division has been fighting in Chasiv Yar, which is where they were attempting to push when Ukraine's Su-27 and new Privet 299 drones struck. This is not any old Russian division. It's one that Russia has leveraged ever since it turned its sights on Ukraine, and it's proven itself very effective. But so too has the drone that Ukraine used in its August 11th strike. We provided a handful of details about that drone already, and we don't know a whole lot more. However, we do know a little bit about the Privet 82, which appears to have inspired Ukraine's new wooden drone. Euromaidan Press reports that the Russian Privet UAV is made using plywood and costs only a few $1,000s to make. Designed by a startup company named Oko, the drone is impressive not just due to its cost-effectiveness, but also the fact that it can travel about 31 miles while holding an 11-pound explosive. The range is considerably higher than that achieved by fiber optic first-person view or FPV drones. In January, Defense Express reported that Ukraine had come up with a version of one of these drones that can travel up to 25 miles, but that drone has to be connected to its operator via fiber optic cable. It appears that Ukraine's new wooden drones don't have that problem. They can travel further, hit just as hard, and leave no trail thanks to the lack of a fiber optic cable. Coming back to the Privet 82, the David Hambling penned Forbes article we mentioned earlier reinforces these points. Russia's wooden drones can hit targets at ranges in excess of 30 miles, far beyond the reach of FPVs, and with a heavier warhead than an FPV, and they cost a fraction as much as other weapons. Hambling also provided a specific price tag, $1,000 per drone. Ukraine's Privet 299 is truly a tweaked and improved version of the Privet 82 and buildable at a similar price point, then August 11th is going to be just the beginning of what Ukraine does with this weapon. Remember that the 24th Mechanized Brigade called the drone used in the August 11th strike new. For all we know, this may have been the Ukrainian Privet's first confirmed combat test. If it was, the drone passed the test with flying colors. And at $1,000 or thereabouts per drone, the odds are that we're going to see a lot more of them entering the Ukrainian battlefield in the coming months. But how much use is yet another drone, albeit one that's cheaper than anything Ukraine has built before, really going to be? As it turns out, very useful. It would certainly be inaccurate to claim that Ukraine is limited when it comes to the sheer number of drones that it brings to the war against Russia. The country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, set a target to build 4.5 million drones in 2025 alone, and there's nothing indicating that Ukraine won't at least get close to that target. Numbers aren't a limiting factor. What limits Ukraine is the range of its drones. The FPV fiber optic drones we mentioned earlier are ideal for short-range engagements along the front line. Trying to send them even a little deeper into Russia's rear is often a non-starter. Fiber optic cables give the game away and can be cut by the frontline troops that these drones attempt to bypass. That would leave Ukraine with its healthy collection of long-range drones to conduct strikes like the one we saw on August 11th. Those drones are certainly capable, but the cost factor comes into play. A single long-range Lyuchi drone, which Ukraine has been using to conduct deep strikes inside Russia, costs $200,000 to build. That's a lot of money to spend on a drone striking a Russian target behind the front lines, but inside Ukraine. Plus, these drones are designed for deep strike and have the multi-hundred miles range you would expect. Using them inside Ukraine feels like a waste when part of the country's strategy now hinges on wearing down the Russian war machine using strikes against military and industrial facilities in the deep rear. The near and mid-rear don't have the perfect drone solution. At least, they didn't. With the Privet 299, Ukraine may have found a cheap solution to the medium-range problem. Euromaidan Press highlights this. At present, Ukraine's FPV drones dominate the battlefield as far as 15 kilometers from the line of contact. Efforts are underway to extend the drone kill zone to 40 kilometers. The goal? Deny Russian forces the ability to move undetected across the front. American-Ukrainian war correspondent David Kirichenko wrote, according to the outlet. Caliber outlines why this would be such an issue for Russia's forces. The broader tactical implications are profound. As the kill zone extends, logistics, artillery concentrations, and troop movements farther behind the front line become increasingly vulnerable. Strategic problems are created for Putin's forces. For most of the war, they've been able to operate right behind the front lines with relative safety. Sure, the occasional Ukrainian drone or missile might break through, but once Russia has occupied territory, it's generally been able to use that territory to funnel troops and equipment to the front lines. Russia's frontline forces are both sustained and replaced, when needed, by those in the immediate rear. Ukraine having a medium-range drone messes all of that up. It allows Ukraine to hit right behind the front line, essentially creating kill zones immediately behind the Russian troops that are trying to push into its territory. Those troops become isolated. They can't go back because Ukraine's medium-range drones can hit them. So they're forced to move forward knowing that supplies and reinforcements aren't coming. Inevitably, they're killed. Russia then faces the problem of trying to push more troops through the medium-range kill zone Ukraine has created. The Privet 299 appears to offer everything Ukraine needs to keep its eyes on and conduct attacks against the Russian troops maneuvering behind the front lines. Caliber says that being spotted within about a mile of the front line is already a death sentence for most Russian troops. Ukraine expanding that distance to several miles behind the front line gives it a huge tactical advantage. How? It allows Ukraine to create a layered wall of drones. On the most basic level, this layered approach seems obvious. Short-range, fiber-optic FPV drones patrol the front lines, tracking and destroying any Russian troops or mechanized units they find. The Privet 299 does the same, but behind the line, creating multi-mile wide kill zones that hamper Russian logistics and isolate troops on the front. And Ukraine's long-range drones are freed up to do what they were designed to do, strike targets in the deep rear rather than being spent on attacks much closer to home. The drone layer is vital from an offensive standpoint, with these strikes also obviously serving Ukraine's defense. However, Ukraine also gets more options as it creates a greater variety of drones that can be used for multiple purposes. Take the British Army's approach, for instance. In May, Army Technology reported that the UK is developing a 3-layered formation that sees it using drones in the front 2 layers, backed by conventional crewed platforms. That's an evolution over the UK's previous layered approach, in which it used crewed platforms including helicopters and multiple launch rocket systems, followed by soldiers on the ground. Drones are a lot cheaper than those crewed platforms. They're also unmanned, meaning using them is far less risky. If Ukraine wishes to advance, this UK approach is perfect. Privet 299s attack the near rear, FPV drones take on Russia's forces at the front, and after that combination of drones has wreaked havoc, Ukraine's ground troops can advance to mop up stragglers and retake territory. Perhaps we're getting ahead of ourselves here. But if the Privet 299 is as versatile and impactful as the August 11th strike seems to suggest, it may become a game-changer for Ukraine. Beyond creating drone layers, that strike is important for a few other reasons. As Defense Express points out in its August 12th article covering the attack, strikes on temporary troop deployments in Bakhmut allow Ukraine to degrade Russian manpower on the Donetsk front line and disrupt the country's ability to rotate troops. In short, the Russian soldiers who are already fighting have to work even longer thanks to strikes like these. That extra fighting leads to exhaustion and collapsing morale, both problems that give Ukraine's defenders an edge. More Russian soldiers will die thanks to this type of disruption. If Ukraine plays its cards well, it may even be able to carve out a path back toward Bakhmut over time. That's not going to happen immediately, but Ukraine would love to recapture that fortress city, which Russia managed to take in 2023. Doing so would reverse one of the most important symbolic victories Russia has achieved during its invasion so far, in addition to providing a massive morale spike for Ukraine's weary defenders. Granted, the city has limited strategic value, as Al Jazeera reported when Russia was making its push to take the territory back in May 2023. But any territory taken is massive for Ukraine, because it means the country gains leverage it can use in any future peace negotiations with Russia. Of course, talk of retaking Bakhmut is premature. Ukraine's use of its new Privet 299 has relieved pressure in Chasiv Yar and on the Donetsk front with a strike near Bakhmut. However, that shows the potential that lies inside Ukraine's cheap wooden drones. With the layered approach we've already discussed, or by simply using its new drones as supporting tools for more ASAM Hammer or JDAM attacks, Ukraine could weaken Russia's hold on a symbolically important piece of territory. Finally, there's what the emergence of the Privet 299 represents to Ukraine itself. another piece of military equipment made inside the country. The strike's success is also indicative of the shift toward increased use of domestically designed and produced weapons, reducing reliance on foreign systems, Defense Express says. And that pivot is in full swing. In April, the Kyiv Independent reported on Zelensky's claim that about 40% of the weapons Ukraine is now using are manufactured domestically. The Ukrainian president's goal is to bump that number up to 50% by 2026, Army Technology says, though there are issues that could prevent that from happening. Funding is the main problem. Ukraine Business News reported on August 11th that Ukraine needs to receive an estimated $6 billion to sustain its domestic defense industrial complex into 2026. More would be better. Ukraine's domestic weapons industry has expanded to the point where it can build 1,000 types of products, ranging from artillery and armored vehicles to missiles and advanced drones. Funding, Ukraine has a production potential of $35 billion. Based on the $6 billion figure for sustaining into 2026, $35 billion will be enough for Ukraine to domestically manufacture the vast majority of its own equipment, perhaps backed up by advanced weapons systems such as the US-made Patriot air defense units. The Privet 299 adds to the ever-growing pile of Ukrainian-made weapons, and if it's even close to matching the $1,000 price tag of its Russian equivalent, this wooden drone could be built in the thousands to become one of the most important tools Ukraine's ground forces can deploy against the Russian invaders. August 11th acted as a proof of concept. Now Russian soldiers are left asking themselves what comes next from Ukraine's brand new wooden drones. While wooden drones are threatening Russia's soldiers behind the front lines, Ukraine's long-range drones are doing serious damage inside Russia itself. Ukraine just did in hours what took Western sanctions years to achieve. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the latest Ukrainian strikes and weapons. And thank you as always for watching.